Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Throne of Steel episode based on novel. So let's start. Since the start of the Holy War, this was the first time the knights attacked the demon camp. They didn't expect this attack to be so decisive. Although they didn't know how the humans managed to create such a powerful forbidden spell by superposition, they knew that the power of this surprise attack was at its greatest while the demons were huddling in tiredness, cold and hunger in the deep night. Right when the 7 demon gods were handling that light elemental forbidden spell that had just exploded with great power and needed their full power to stop it, another attack occurred on the other side of the camp. This was clearly prepared in advance. The Holy War had already been going for a year and a half. Just like the demons had a deep understanding of the defenses and strength of the Night Temple, humans also had a complete understanding of the demon armies. The superiority of the demon armies was undoubtable, but some of their shortcomings and weaknesses were found out by the powerhouses from the Night Temple long ago. All else aside, the crowded aspect of their camp alone was a big issue. If fire was to spread in the camp, burning down the whole camp wasn't impossible. But of course, given the strength of their powerhouses, by itself fire would at most destroy a part of the tents and would be far from enough to harm the Demon Emperor legions outside. Therefore, the Night Temple had not yet launched such a surprise attack. That's because a surprise attack would have its greatest impact the first time. Paralyzing the enemy requires time, and attacking requires a very strong power. If planned carelessly, this might only inadvertently alert the enemy. The Night Temple had been enduring silently until then, but now has come the time of the counterattack. 5 other figures appeared, and didn't insist on continuing to fight after throwing out those gaudy balls of light, immediately turning back to leave, and flying at great speed in the opposite direction. Once again, that terrifying superposed forbidden spell could be heard, this time from the other direction of the demon camp. The intense bright light burst into the shape of an immense golden mushroom cloud, originating from the location of Demon Emperor Legion troops in their camp, and spread out at a frightening speed to all 4 directions. Although a great amount of powerhouses from the demon armies woke up from dreamland upon sensing the first forbidden spell, this had just happened too fast. Even those demons at the 7th or 8th step were far from reaching the reaction speed of the 7 demon gods. In a state of starvation and freezing, they were deep in slumberland since long ago. Abruptly sensing the appearance of a massive aura of light, they were at most woken up, but didn't have the time to rush out from their tents, before the second wave of attacks came. Immediately, the demon powerhouses that were in the range of the light elemental forbidden spell were sorrowfully engulfed, thoroughly disappearing inside the holy flames. In this third wave, they also appeared in the midst of a Demon Emperor Legion's area. However, this time, the attack was aimed at the middle of the demon camp. After a series of light balls was thrown, Long Houchen immediately gave out the order of retreat. "Boss, how about taking advantage of the chaos to rush in and kill the most enemies possible?" Hanyu whispered in Long Houchen's ear. Long Houchen firmly rejected his idea. "The forbidden spells won't last for long. Our objective is to launch a surprise attack and then to immediately retreat. Otherwise, the 7 demon gods will counterattack, and we won't be able to leave even if we try." Although he was hurried to complete the mission of gathering 10 million contribution points, guaranteeing his personal safety was the most important. In fact, his life could be said to not just be his own anymore, but the whole alliance's hope. Therefore, he didn't zealously continue fighting in the least, but immediately led the 50 knights to retreat and withdrew back to the dragon-resisting mountain pass. This surprise attack was orchestrated during the military meeting that took place before, with the simple and direct objective of destroying the 3 Demon Emperor legions. Although the 3 Demon Emperor legions had yet to join the battlefield until now, the threat they represented for the dragon-resisting mountain pass was unquestionable. Having piled up the reports for over a year of scouting, the Night Temple had grasped their position since long ago, and even knew clearly where the magical offense-specialized Hell Demons were situated. Actually, a part of the Hell Demons that were carried and defended on the back of the Fiends at daytime was assigned to the Demon Emperor Legion. As mage forces, they represented the greatest threat to the dragon-resisting mountain pass. Therefore, today, the main targets were the Demon Emperor Legions as well as the Hell Demons. The weapon that was launched previously by every knight of the group was a secret weapon belonging to the Night Temple, which was making its first appearance in the battlefield. This weapon was called Light Bomb, a powerful weapon purely aimed at blasting light essence to kill and injure the enemies, as well as a good item that was kept concealed by the Night Temple. Light Bomb was totally unlaunchable through the magic cannons because it would immediately produce a violent explosion even before being shot, or just after coming out. This couldn't threaten the enemies in the slightest, and became instead a self-damaging weapon. But during their tests, the Night Temple's researchers found out to their great surprise about a good benefit of the light bombs. That was their ability to superimpose their effects. After identical light bombs explode, the effects of the additional ones will add up, and the continuous increase of power could go up several-fold. This discovery immediately brought great joy to them, and resurrected the researches on the light bombs that was close to being abandoned. After spending a long time experimenting and researching, they finally discovered that the effects of the superpositions were the greatest when the power of the light bomb was unleashed through a power equivalent to that of light magic of the fourth step. Unfortunately, it could still not be launched through magic cannons, and could only be thrown by hand. It further required a light user to set the light essence aflame after the throw to produce that superimposed blasting power. After its creation, this item was very rapidly criticized because in the battlefield, going through this process of superposition was just too difficult. A light bomb reaching only the fourth step, when fired, would immediately be stopped by the enemy. Where could there be any chance to complete superposition in such circumstances? One could say that in a situation of direct clashing on the battlefield, accumulating light bombs until reaching the forbidden spell level was almost impossible. Furthermore, don't jump to conclusions just because light bombs only display the might of spells of the fourth step. Their cost of fabrication is extremely high, not only requiring the hand of a great expert, but also mithril, as well as many other kinds of precious metals that can be welded together with magical crystals of the light element, making for a very high total cost. Therefore, this experiment was a success, but in the end, very few light bombs were made. Rare metals were still manageable and could always be found, but the light element crystals were really hard to find, and having the knights hunt the magical beasts gathered in the Night Saint Mountain was no solution. Therefore, in the Night Temple's treasure, there were only a few hundred of these and no more, and they weren't really used after being invented. But since they used up so much energy to make these things, the Night Temple naturally considered a situation where they could display the greatest power. And that situation was a sneak attack. Only when ambushing the enemy could the superposition ability of these light bombs be exploited fully. And the surprise attack that took place today was the first stage for the light bombs in history. For the sake of this surprise attack, the Night Temple made an extremely detailed plan that would have its best effect the first time it was used. Hence, Long Qiannian gave the final decision to take out all these things they had in store. This was the terror of forbidden spells. In front of such a surprise attack composed of forbidden spells, the Hell Demons, most of whom reached the sixth step in strength, didn't have much ability to resist. Even the defensive demons such as demonic bears could only lose their lives in front of such a powerful attack, to say nothing of the physically weak hell demons. The 7 demon gods were now infuriated to the extreme. Just as the power of the forbidden spell they were confronting was starting to die down, the other 2 forbidden spells exploded. Even if the other powerhouses of the 9th step staying in the demon camp did their best to stand in front of the power of the forbidden spells, in the end they didn't have the protection from the demon god pillars, and didn't dare insist stubbornly on the task. Therefore, 2 huge golden mushroom clouds were seen spreading out in the sky above the camp. Saminaga's teeth nearly broke down from the gritting. Although the demons' damage had always been huge in this holy war, this was the first time they suffered such a blow. And those were the 3 demon emperor legions affiliated with the demon god emperor. The last time, he was already furious when hearing about the hard blow the 2nd legion suffered. As a result, a devil king acting as Saminaga's man was beaten nearly to death, and was still recuperating even now. This time, with such a heavy damage sustained by the 3 legions, even with his status, the demon god emperor won't easily excuse him. Right at this time, Saminaga took notice of the last batch of escaping knights, and immediately noticed Star King being ridden by Long Houchen. That was a starlight unicorn king. Even in the eyes of Saminaga, that was a considerably powerful light elemental magical beast. Moreover, he had just seen Star King's master display a glorious divine tool. How could he forget such a scene that easily? Seeing Long Houchen, Saminaga's thoughts were stimulated, thinking secretly, to make up for the loss of the 3 demon emperor legions that will surely incur the demon god emperor's rage, I'm afraid I could only bring this divine tool back to our emperor. Although the demon gods wouldn't be able to use them, handing over a light elemental divine tool would indeed most likely be enough to appease the fury of the demon god emperor. Therefore, right after sorting out his thoughts, he immediately set himself in motion, and flapped his immense grey wings, immediately shooting up like a grey meteor to chase after Long Houchen. Long Houchen was after all not a god, and naturally couldn't possibly guess what the thoughts of Saminaga were. He didn't use his spiritual wings for fear of leaking out his identity, but it turned out that the sight of Star King still made him a target of the demon god of death. Saminaga's sudden departure shocked the other 6 demon gods, because they weren't done handling the first forbidden spell. When he left, the power of the forbidden spell immediately spread out, engulfing dozens of troops from Demon Emperor legions. The only one that really understood his thoughts was the demonic bear god Visago. That was because he took notice of Long Houchen and was prepared to chase after him, but was preempted by Saminaga. Under the circumstances, Visago couldn't carry out his plan. Otherwise, it would be seen as a provocation towards Saminaga. Although he had always wanted to seize the fifth seat as a demon god, he wasn't willing to have a confrontation with Saminaga. He was very clear on the strength of the Fiend clan. "Han Yu, quickly go!" With a loud shout, Long Houchen had Star King turn back, while unleashing rippling light. An orange glint was loosed from his left hand as well, quickly protecting his whole body. The divine snail shield of Sun and Moon really deserved being called an existence with the potential of reaching the super divine tool level. After releasing it, Long Houchen immediately felt his whole body becoming light, and that feeling oppressing his body was greatly weakening. However, he could already discern at this time the demon god of death who was chasing madly after him and couldn't help but gasp in reaction. That was the fourth-ranked demon god. Even as a powerhouse reaching over 400,000 spiritual energy, his grandfather admitted to not being his match. Above the ninth step, every rank was a whole new stage, and the gap separating them could not simply be described with words. Even if Long Jianying had more than 200,000 spiritual energy and had his divine throne, he was only able to end up in mutual destruction against Saminaga. How could Houchen resist? But this time, Long Houchen couldn't retreat. No matter what, Star King's speed couldn't possibly compare with Saminaga. Being targeted, Long Houchen didn't have the slightest chance to resist. Moreover, he was the commander of this army, and the newly appointed Saint Knight head. In this moment of life or death, how could he leave his allies' backs to the enemy's mercy? Therefore, he had to remain, and do his best to resist Saminaga. Maybe he had no other choice but to use that power. That was the only thing that could help him escape a certain loss without leaking his identity. Long Houchen considered it thoroughly, and decided to rely on the divine snail shield of Sun and Moon to block Saminaga and give his comrades enough time to go. At the same time, he was confident that from the dragon-resisting mountain pass, his grandfather surely took notice of the situation. Until it becomes absolutely necessary, he absolutely wouldn't transfer to the Tower of Eternity. Seeing Long Houchen lift up his left arm, Saminaga reduced his chasing speed at once. In the daytime, he had seen the might of that shield with his own eyes, and didn't know how the divine snail shield of Sun and Moon could turn into a divine tool. But in front of such an item, he remained extremely prudent despite having absolute self-confidence. The air behind Saminaga took almost no time to take the shape of a vicious fiend skull, instantly engulfing Long Houchen with a colossal grey airflow. In the midst of an overflowing aura of death, it felt as if countless spectres were howling in grief. This took a long time to describe, but only a few seconds had passed since Long Houchen had been overtaken by Saminaga's chase. Long Houchen was now completely devoid of distracting thoughts. Another Saint Knight of the 8th step would perhaps have already lost his head in fear in front of this demon god of death, without even need to specify that Saminaga was using all his strength. But Long Houchen didn't. He was the Scion of Light, the god's chosen one, and having gone through over a year in secluded training, he had gotten rid of his distracting thoughts long ago. Therefore, he almost instantly entered the state of releasing Sword's Heart. Saminaga's terrifying domain of death was surrounding him, but at this time, an orange glow was radiating from Long Houchen's left hand. An incomparably dense sword intent came out from his shield, bursting out into the shape of an orange disk of light, and forcibly forming a zone exclusive to Long Houchen in the midst of the domain of death. Saminaga's pupils shrank abruptly. His flying speed slowed even more. He had sensed a similar sword intent before, and in that earlier battle, the sword intent had actually even injured the demon god emperor. Saminaga hadn't been living for as long as the demon god emperor, but he exceeded the age of 300 long AGI, and he had personally witnessed the scene of the temple head of the warrior temple, divine sword wielder Yi Wushang's challenge towards the demon god emperor. That battle finished rapidly. After all, how could Yi Wushang's strength compare to the demon god emperor? But he had staked everything on his powerful sword intent to injure the demon god emperor just before getting killed. And right now, on the gold foundation armor knight before his eyes, Yi Wushang's sword intent seemed to have reappeared. So much that compared to the former, this sword intent didn't reach its degree of strength, but its intensity seemed even greater. Yi Wushang's sword intent was filled with an incomparable sharpness. But this gold foundation armored knight sword intent seemed to give off in addition a penetrating and overwhelming feeling. That sword intent was different, but its might was clearly not inferior by much. Moreover, Yi Wushang was originally using a divine sword which was also a divine tool. Yet this knight's weapon was incredibly more strange, as it appeared to be a shield that could release sword intent and unleash the power of a divine tool. Saminaga had lived for over 300 years, but this was the first time he saw such a thing. Therefore, he couldn't help but act prudently. From Saminaga's point of view, to possess both a gold foundation armor of epic tier and a divine tool, Long Houchen was surely a holy knight, powerhouse of the 9th step. That was not a divine knight, but relying on a divine tool, his strength ought to be comparable to Long Qianying's. Therefore, his assessment of Long Houchen's strength reached a whole new level. Moreover, seeing the powerful sword intent overpower a part of the area of his domain of death, he became even more certain of his supposition. Long Houchen didn't think about anything else. His sword was his everything. After more than 9 spiritual cavities are formed, a spiritual pill, also known as a spiritual core, will be produced. Any human powerhouse can increase his spiritual cavities through cultivating, but will only have one spiritual core, which remains inside his first spiritual cavity. Spiritual pills are far more useful than the magical crystals left by the demons. After all, these were only possessed by powerhouses of the 9th step. The demons had the means to eliminate the elemental properties of a spiritual pill, to make it work with pure spiritual energy, and a spiritual pill could act in the battlefield as a life, even to a powerhouse such as Saminaga. A spiritual pill could instantly replenish the user's whole spiritual energy. It takes no time and produces no side effects, which is why a spiritual pill is, to an alchemist, an ingredient of the best quality to make top-rated medicine. The stronger the powerhouse of the 9th step leaving the spiritual pill, the better its effects. However, using a spiritual pill is a totally forbidden thing for a human to do. In case a powerhouse of the 9th step dies, it will immediately be buried in a special cemetery, in a place only known by the supreme leaders of the Alliance. Of course, this is one of the highest-rated secret in the Temple Alliance. Even if Long Houchen wanted to know about it, that could only wait for the day he would become the head of the Night Temple. A large grey hand pierced the sky, instantly enlarging to a size of 10 meters, aiming straight at Long Houchen to grab him. At the time it just appeared, that hand was formed of grey airflow, but when it was about to reach out, it had already solidified completely. Long Houchen wasn't afraid. Looking ahead with a limpid pair of eyes, he lifted his left hand high above his head, before slowly dropping it. The orange glow intensified abruptly, and the orange disc of over 10 meters diameter descended slowly. Then, the incomparably sharp sword intent on it disappeared in a brief moment, and the whole area was colored orange, except for the golden halo that was spreading from Star King to Long Houchen's whole body. Bam! The bright disc and the large hand clashed. Saminaga's right hand made a grasping movement. Immediately, a terrible aura of darkness and death surged out, surrounding Long Houchen before blasting out. Terrifying fluctuations of spiritual energy could very clearly be sensed, even from the dragon-resisting mountain pass. Holding the demon god of death's full attention, he was shown Saminaga's true strength. What powerful attacks! Dragon-resisting mountain pass. A dense bluish-golden glint was shooting toward the demon camp at an incomparable speed. At the very moment, Long Qianying was totally fired up. He absolutely didn't expect Saminaga to act against Long Houchen. In the original plans, the chance of the demon gods acting directly was calculated, but in these calculations, they were estimated to be most likely to act at the first stages. That is, if they didn't care about the explosion of these forbidden spells, they would then attack the knights belonging to the first wave of attacks. And amongst them was the powerhouse He-Jun. His protection would be enough for the Mithril Foundation knights to withdraw. Moreover, during the discussions the odds of the demon gods intervening were estimated to be negligible. Those forbidden spells were aimed at the 3 demon emperor legions. Even if these demon gods extinguished the first one, they should do their utmost to dispel the other 2 blasts, and reduce their damage. The demon emperor legions were very precious to the demon god emperor. Who could have expected Saminaga to suddenly stop caring about the forbidden spells, in order to aim solely at Long Houchen? Long Qianying was now filled with regrets to the last bone. He suddenly realized the major issue they had overlooked. Long Houchen couldn't be recognized, riding another mount, using other weapons, and showing an overwhelmingly different strength. Unless Saminaga had X-ray vision, he couldn't possibly recognize Houchen's identity. Then, there was only one explanation for why he aimed at Long Houchen. That was the divine tool he displayed earlier in the day. Long Qianying understood that he had really been careless, neglecting the possibility of Long Houchen's exposure. If Long Houchen's spiritual wings were the same as other people's, he simply wouldn't have been targeted by Saminaga and would have returned safely. But his spiritual wings were a set of 4, which was an overly extraordinary sight. Therefore he had no choice but to call forth the Starlight Unicorn King, which Saminaga surely recognized as the mount belonging to the powerful knight that killed the 2 fiend commanders that day. Which is why Saminaga targeted him. Since the situation had become like this, regrets were useless. They hadn't planned this situation, no one expected that things could turn out this way. Now, the only thing he could do was to go to Long Houchen's rescue as fast as possible. Among all the high-ups of the Night Temple remaining in the dragon-resisting mountain pass, only Long Qianying knew about the importance of Long Houchen Toy the Night Temple. Moreover, all of this aside, Long Haochen was his grandson, and his only grandson at that. Long Qianying initially felt great guilt towards Long Haochen, but at this very moment, seeing his grandson attacked by Saminaga and already completely caught within his domain, how could he not be anxious? A bluish-golden flow of light remained on the trail of Long Qianying's back, and one could clearly see that the brilliance belonging to the divine throne of order and law was coming out from his back. Bolts of bluish-golden light were continuously following after Long Qianying, transforming into an armor that equipped itself to him. Every time the bluish-golden armor gained a layer, Long Qianying's demeanor became more imposing, and the sky behind him lit up with more intensity. In his state of full power, Long Qianying showed no reserve. Even if he fell in the battlefield, he would rescue Long Haochen no matter what. That was his sole wish. However, Long Qianying was not very optimistic. But since he had already closed the distance after all, Saminaga's offense now became slower. At the time he set out from the dragon-resisting mountain pass, Saminaga's hand of death had already gotten hold of Long Haochen and Star King. Confronting that golden pillar of light, Saminaga's eyes became extremely chilly, and lifting his right hand, he slowly charged. His slow moves compared to the refracted light were totally incomparable. And Saminaga's punch finally clashed with the descending pillar of light without deviating in the slightest. An inexhaustible grey spiral clashed against the golden pillar of light, and grey fog surged in response, but this time didn't disperse from beginning to end. A grim shrill spread out in the midst of the sweet sounds, and 12 fierce fiend skulls appeared, intertwining with each other, and planning on shattering the pillar of light. Long Haochen was using God's descent, borrowing power from the goddess of light. This was far from being his first time attempting such an attack. This was naturally quite weaker than the power of the aria of the goddess of light, but the purity of the spiritual energy involved was a lot greater. However, in the end his opponent was still too powerful. Even God's descent didn't have much use in front of the demon god of death. With a stuffy groan, Long Haochen's body shook and Star King had the same reaction. This looked like a simple attack, but Long Haochen already put his full power forth. Resisting the attack hand of death which reached the 9th step and furthermore launching a counterattack was already the most he could do. The difference of strength was that huge. Even with a greater sword intent, the insufficient backup of spiritual energy would have made it unable to display its full glory. Saminaga was far from using his full strength to dispose of Long Haochen. While rushing there, Long Qianying obviously paid attention to this. Although this was a simple exchange of blows, how could he, at his current level of strength, not sense Long Haochen's actual cultivation through this? The demon god of death already understood that this was only a knight of the 8th step that had a divine tool in his hand, his cultivation still very far from the 9th step. But regardless of his cultivation, the most important was to get that divine tool. The reason why Saminaga had yet to use his full power was that the divine snail shield of sun and moon hadn't yet released its power, so he had to remain careful. The 7-colored light from the daytime made him really apprehensive. He had to confirm the extent the might of this light reached before anything else. After causing the rupture of the golden light, that grey whirlpool gained in volume at a tremendous speed, almost instantly covering Long Haochen's whole body in its sphere of influence, and even Star King was engulfed inside along with him. Cycle of Death was Saminaga's ultimate technique. Against it, even Long Qianying had to rely on the power of his divine tool to have a chance of resistance. Could Long Qianying make it in time to rescue Long Haochen? That was hard to say. That's because, on his way here, a robust figure came to block his way, the demonic bear god Veilfor. Although Veilfor coveted Saminaga's position, he remained globally sober-headed as a demon god. After resolving the first forbidden spell, he had the other 5 demon gods go weaken the other 2 forbidden spells' power and rescue the members of the Demon Emperor Legion, and came himself, flying past Saminaga, to block Long Qianying's way. Long Qianying let out a loud shout, and the sky became completely golden blue, creating a contrast with the grey domain of death. The magnificent golden blue armor on him covered his whole body, and the blue moonlight shape on his back came from his divine throne of order and law. He had a single weapon, a very huge hammer. Even with Long Qianying's cultivation, he needed both of his hands to manipulate it. Quite coincidentally, Veilfor was using large hammers as well, one in each hand. Completely yellow in color, they seemed like 2 huge sculpted crystals. With rumbling sounds, the hammer clashed against the dual-headed hammers violently in the sky. Veilfor didn't activate his domain before that, but the instant the 3 hammers collided, a large area spread to over 300 meters distance, in the midst of which a yellow gigantic bear appeared. Roaring at the sky, he shook the dragon-resisting mountain pass with great scale. With this shockwave, Long Qianying was stopped, blocked forcefully, and sent flying 100 meters away. The demonic bear's strongest point was their physical strength, so even with Long Qianying's divine armor transformed from the divine throne of order and law, his sheer brute force was unable to compete with Veilfor at all. As the 6th demon god, how could he be such an easy opponent to handle? Without sufficient power as a basis, how could Veilfor dare contest the seats of the top 5 demon gods? Long Qianying was repelled a bit, not letting out a single word. He saw the distant grey fog clearly, but wasn't able to discern the figures of Long Houchen and Saminaga, the demon god of death. He had traded blows with Saminaga a few times already, and also had an ample comprehension of Long Houchen ability. He knew that even if Long Houchen didn't keep his strength concealed, he couldn't last for long in front of Saminaga. Moreover, the full divine tool-grade power of Long Houchen's divine snail shield was far beyond his own grasp. But for him to actually keep calm even in such a situation, and in such a dangerous crisis, Long Qianying truly deserved to be called the divine knight of control and law. The golden blue hammer in his hand was slowly lifted up above his head, where one could see that its length was about 4 meters. Its blunt part was circular, and about 2/3 of a meter in diameter. On that part were several imprints of moon shapes, full moons, waxing moons, waning moons, and many other variation, B.S. Every one of these imprints were colored in brilliant golden blue. After lifting it up, Long Qianying chanted gravely, "Heaven and earth, law and order. Listen to my call, moon god's power. Shine." Immediately, the golden blue radiance covering the whole sky undulated, and took the unexpected shape of a quarter moon. As it shot out moonlight that spread sacred light, a pure and simple golden blue radiance lit upon his hammer. When Valefor's 2 hammers pushed Long Qianying away, the shock he sustained was actually important too. It was especially due to the massive light essence poured inside Long Qianying's gigantic divine tool-graded hammer, requiring Valefor to spend time to scatter it. Right now, looking at Long Qianying's hammer as it spread moonlight, his expression became all the more serious. Valefor's originally wild look gradually became filled with shock. That's because he clearly sensed that his power was gradually being suppressed and the air surrounding his body was compressed astoundingly rapidly. This compression of the air was cutting him off from his domain. The surroundings came under the full control of Long Qianying, since the great power of law and control resided in domain control. Although this divine throne was ranked in the latter part amongst the 6, its sheer ability to counter enemy domains was only second to the divine throne of eternity and creation. Long Qianying's domain could not only greatly amplify his power, but also damage the enemy's domain. And at the 9th step level, a domain's utility was really important. Bang! Valefor's 2 hammers were sent flying, just like huge yellow artillery shells launched far away. The demonic bear domain behind him that used to amplify his physical abilities was unexpectedly shattered, and the bluish-golden half-moon on Long Qianying's back became twice as large. The bluish-golden radiance emitted by the moon god's hammer became incomparably resplendent. Long Qianying's face suddenly became abnormally flushed. Beating Valefor back was easier said than done. He had already exceeded the normal use of the divine god of law and order, but for the sake of saving Long Houchen, he was willing to pay an even higher cost. Taking another deep breath, as he was planning to launch an attack against the domain of death materialized by Saminaga, an extremely shocking scene came into his view. Saminaga's domain of death was bursting out, and from inside, a myriad of bright rays of light were rushing out. Despite the strength of his domain, it was totally unable to stop the development of these rays of light. The whole domain had great effects, and in addition, everywhere the light passed, the grey-colored domain of death disappeared frantically. The whole domain was like a giant creature at its final struggle. How could that be? This was Long Qianying's first thought. He was fully aware of Long Houchen's strength, and to say nothing about the fact he was still unable to use the divine tool-level ability of the divine snail shield. Even if he could, the gap of strength between Saminaga and him should make it impossible for him to break through Saminaga's domain. When Long Qianying was clashing with Valefor, he was only praying that Long Houchen could hold out for longer with the help of the divine snail shield, to buy enough time for him to come to the rescue. But he really didn't expect such a situation. That bright golden color was clearly of light attribute, and from this, Long Houchen actually seemed to have the advantage, and a definite advantage at that. Saminaga was too powerful. On the basis of his spiritual energy exceeding 400,000, when used by him, this ability was already approaching the might of a forbidden spell. Don't underestimate it, because it doesn't need preparation time. Its terrifying power is like a completely solidified spiritual highland. Although Long Houchen had the divine snail shield of sun and moon to defend himself, even if the latter could resist this degree of power, Star King would certainly not be able to resist, and would end up lacerated by the powerful oppressive force. So the instant cycle of death descended, he immediately sent Star King back to his own space, while stimulating the eternal melody on his chest without any hesitation. Only by escaping through the Tower of Eternity could he cope with the situation. In there, Long Houchen was quite safe. As his strength increased, his connection to the Tower of Eternity came to deepen. Now, almost no more than a thought sufficed for him to link with the Tower of Eternity. Even though Cycle of Death was terrifying enough, it was unable to sever this connection, which enabled him to escape. This was the major reason why Long Houchen didn't feel anxious in the slightest. But when Long Houchen activated the Eternal Melody, making an instant full contact with the Tower of Eternity, a change occurred. On his chest, the Eternal Melody abruptly released an incomparable golden radiance and scorching heat. That severe scorching heat nearly burnt Long Houchen's body, and even with his willpower, he couldn't help but scream in pain. Immediately, he saw a myriad of bright rays of light burst forth, as the eternal melody transmitted to him an indescribable feeling of ecstasy. And then, he actually managed to repel the cycle of death as the myriad of light rays wrapped Long Houchen. Long Jianying and Long Houchen were greatly shocked, but what they felt was not comparable to Saminaga's feelings. Saminaga's assessment of Long Houchen's strength was accurate, and he was inevitably going to succeed. In front of cycle of death, even the might of Long Houchen's divine tool shouldn't be able to last long. After all, the gap of strength was too great. He was only waiting for Long Houchen to die and for his soul to blend into the domain of death, and then, the divine tool would naturally become his. But when Saminaga started to pay attention to Long Qianying and Visago's battle, and prepared to block Long Qianying's attack, change occurred. While engulfed by cycle of death, from Long Houchen's chest burst forth a myriad of light rays. Even in Long Qianying's eyes, these lights had a holy attribute of boundless purity. It was rather different in Saminaga's eyes. That golden light had a fantastic characteristic that was enough to give Saminaga some dread. Although this domain of death was originating from him, it continuously took essence from those who died inside as time passed. The power of these souls was engulfed unceasingly, and they turned into specters residing in the domain, amplifying its might greatly. For this reason, Saminaga's domain stood out amongst all demonkind. Its power was enough to receive high praises from Agaz and Visago. His position as fourth demon god was precisely settled by the domain of death. Right before, Saminaga utilized the 12 most powerful spectre kings coming from it to instantly crush Long Houchen's god descent. Having attained such a level, his death magic could be already said to reach incredible heights, totally fearless in front of the power of ordinary holy light. But at this very moment, he had a real feeling of dread. That's because the myriad of light rays that burst out from Long Houchen's chest were swallowing the power of his domain at a frantic speed. That's right, it wasn't destroyed or dissolved, but swallowed. He could sense very clearly that the spectres composing his domain were swallowed at an astonishing speed, and cycle of death was broken in almost no time. When Long Houchen reappeared in his line of sight, a golden pagoda seemed to be shrouding him. And from that golden pagoda, an incomparably powerful and oppressive aura was rushing forth. Saminaga had only felt such a pressure in front of the demon god emperor himself before. A golden light 10 times more powerful than before burst out from the golden pagoda. One could faintly discern that, inside this golden pagoda, a bunch of whitish golden spectres were lacerating his domain of death while swallowing it frantically. In a few blinks of an eye, that light had already spread to the whole domain of death. What's that? Saminaga became totally panicked. In his panic, he didn't have the wisdom to keep on his back the 12 grey sparkling spectres, which were all about 10 meters in diameter, and frantically shot them at that golden pagoda. The demon god of death sensed that allowing this pagoda to keep engulfing his domain of death would result in its thorough destruction. This power was really too frightening. The oppression he felt from that golden pagoda surpassed by far Long Houchen's divine snail shield as he saw it during daytime. At the time this golden pagoda appeared, he felt unable to resist. A divine tool, and definitely not an ordinary one, but one that totally suppressed him with its attribute. As a matter of fact, the demon god of death Saminaga was really excessively unlucky. Another demon god, even if far lower ranked, would have forced Long Houchen to teleport back into the Tower of Eternity long ago. Long Houchen couldn't resist in front of absolute strength. But the crucial point was that Saminaga had acted personally. His magic of death used the darkness element as its foundation, and he could be said to be the greatest powerhouse of the whole continent in death magic. But the fact that he was the current best mage of death didn't mean that he was the strongest in history. Saminaga was indeed a great character, ranked 4th in strength among all demons, and current top-ranked death magic practitioner powerhouse, but the gap separating him from Elux was not a little one. The Sign of Light and God's chosen one Elux even dared to blaspheme the goddess of light. That's the extent of his strength. And his wisdom and intelligence enabled him to attain the peak in the research of necromancy, englobing the notions pertaining to death magic. Also, he left behind the Tower of Eternity, a super-divine tool able to move from space to space. How could Saminaga contend against that? If Elux was still alive, Saminaga would, in his eyes, only be a powerful soul to get and no more. He didn't even qualify for a 1 versus 1 fight. The difference in strength was quite distinct. In such circumstances, when Houchen activated the Eternal Melody, planning on returning to the Tower of Eternity, it sensed the domain of death's massive quantity of spectres and power of death through their connection. To humans, this was a terrifyingly destructive power. But to the Tower of Eternity, this was simply an incomparably great tonic. Just how much did Saminaga amass over the years? And it was a pure energy of death, which didn't need much filtering. Hence the Tower of Eternity entered a state of excitement, feeling the great tonic that was just in sight. How could it possibly let it slip by so easily? Therefore, a projection of it instantly shot through the space of Shengmo Dalu, protecting Long Houchen while starting to take these greatly tonifying things as food. Saminaga was totally out of luck. If he hadn't regarded Long Houchen too highly and instead of directly using the domain of death had relied on his powerful spiritual energy to launch an attack, this situation wouldn't have happened. As a super divine tool, the attractive force it possessed towards specters was unquestionable and irresistible. And holy light was no less than the nemesis of darkness. Encountering Elux, Saminaga was like a young girl in front of a hungry and thirsty macho man. The two of them could complement each other, but the difference of strength being such, it could only end up one way. The 12 specters threw themselves at the Tower of Eternity. These two specter kings were one of Saminaga's greatest trump cards. Having continuously nourished them with other specters, they became powerful enough to resist in front of God's descent, even without being at full power. But upon encountering the Tower of Eternity now, all of this came to an end. These 12 great specters were really tough. The light emitted by the Tower of Eternity managed at most to shake them, with no way of absorbing their extremely condensed soul force. But the situation changed totally from the mere fact that these 12 great specter kings moved towards the Tower of Eternity. The light that seemed to have no effect on them before suddenly lit up, turning from a golden color to an incandescent white, and a terrible sort of soul shock burst forth from the Tower of Eternity. The 12 specter kings screamed in mourning almost simultaneously. Their massive, congealed bodies shook violently, turning into innumerable spectral fragments that spread through the air. Circles of incandescent white light surged out frantically, absorbing and swallowing these soul fragments. The brilliance of the Tower of Eternity also broke completely through Saminaga's domain of death at this time, transforming into an area of omnipresent golden light which totally rejected the domain of death. Not only was the soul force from the domain of death was absorbed, but even the newly deceased troops from the Demon Emperor legions had their souls absorbed at a frantic speed. This was the power of a super-divine tool. Even the mere projection of the tool already displayed an incomparably terrifying might. As a super-divine tool, the Tower of Eternity was highly wise and intelligent in its own right. To fully gain control of it, Long Houchen could only complete every trial left by Elux, and upon finally reaching the top of the tower, he might receive the inheritance of the Holy Necromancer. The main body of the Tower of Eternity had a strong sense of independence. Feeling that this space could provide him with things of extreme benefit, it chose not to spare any cost, spreading its divine light to this world to plunder every benefit without restraint. Earlier, just as the 12 Spectre Kings threw themselves at the Tower of Eternity, given its power as a super-divine tool, how could it be unable to damage them? It just chose to do that deliberately. That's because the Tower of Eternity sensed the great power of these 12. By attacking them from a distance, it would definitely cause them to run away in fright. And as a projection, it had no way to forcibly attract them from a far distance. At the very moment, Saminaga was letting out extremely bizarre shrills, and in the demon camp located downwards, a myriad of hissing sounds could be heard. Countless black lights shot up from there towards Saminaga's direction. Including Vale 4, the other demon gods are formed up behind him, each of them transmitting the power of his own demon god pillar. The demon god pillars emitted different radiances, each of them originating from their own clan's original incarnation. 7 great shadows spread their brilliance in the sky, and its greatest attack erupted to bombard the Tower of Eternity. The 7 great demon gods' joint attack created a spectacular scene, of a kind that was unseen for several years. Even as the wielder of the divine throne of order and law, the divine knight Long Qianying was caused to drop down from the sky by the shock. Saminaga was already fighting as if his life depended of it. His previous shrill drew support from the whole Fiend clan's power, originating from his Fiend blood-linked bloodline magic. Through this spell, he was able to instantly transfer a part of each of his clansmen's strength to launch his ultimate blow. In this dragon-resisting mountain pass demon camp could be said to be the root of the Fiend clan's forces. The boost they gave to Saminaga was as great as one may well imagine. Adding to that the amplification from the demon god pillars, it enabled Saminaga to use his strongest attack ever launched. He had no other choice but to fight at all costs. In case the domain of death ended up completely swallowed, the 12 Spectre Kings would be fully absorbed by the Tower of Eternity. Then, Saminaga's cultivation would be reduced by half. To say nothing of the internal wounds induced, he would never be able to keep the 4th demon god's seat due to that. So, he would rather use his bloodline magic to transfer power from his clansmen and weaken them greatly, to try the utmost to preserve his own domain. The united attack of the 7 great demon gods was really terrifying. This was already far beyond the power of a forbidden spell. The incandescent heat surrounding the Tower of Eternity twisted frantically, but didn't show the slightest resistance to the 7 demon gods' act of joining their forces. It just continued to swallow all the death force it could swallow, including the remnants of the 12 Spectre Kings. Quickly, a brilliance with the power of 7 forbidden spells came to bombard the Tower of Eternity. Watching from afar, Long Qianying had even lost his ability to breath. To his great shock, he saw that Long Houchen was precisely inside that golden pagoda. And the pagoda itself didn't seem material at all, solely formed of energy. But he was just a single person. Even if the strength of a divine knight was even greater, he couldn't possibly resist the joint attack launched by 7 great demon gods including Saminaga and Vale 4. The terrible pressure and fluctuations of spiritual energy made him unable to even approach the area. But Long Chenying immediately dropped his jaw. Part 1 end here.